Welcome back, everybody. This week, in America. Thank you for joining us on the program. Great to have you with us today. Of course, you can follow us on the internet at thisweekinamerica.us. The novel Sunken Spanish Treasure Quest by Richard Joseph Johnson is not the typical story about a sunken treasure hunt conducted by a group of experienced and adventurous men seeking their fortunes under the sea. These four men were just regular guys with no knowledge whatsoever of underwater treasure hunting with its many pitfalls and perils. They were close friends who had finally reached a point in their rather tedious and somewhat boring lives where they wanted to do something daring and exciting and at the same time provide them with a rare opportunity to become fabulously rich. This is the 14th title book by Richard and his 11th fiction novel. His books include a mix of psychological thrillers, horror, mysteries, political intrigue, and exciting tales of adventure like Sunken Spanish Treasure Quest. Now living in Largo, Florida with his wife Alice, his personal editor and a nonfiction writer herself, acclaimed author Richard Joseph Johnson, our guest on today's This Week in America. Richard, welcome to the program. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here.
So many books that you've written. I saw that bio a few months ago. Have you written anything in the meantime, or is 14 bring us up to date here?
That was the last one I had written, but I also wrote, in addition to the fiction, I've written a couple of biographies.
Okay,
some music.
Okay, and we'll talk about that. Such a diverse background and entertaining so many people with the books that he's written. This one in particular, we're talking about Sunken Spanish Treasure Quest. This takes us all the way back to like 1733, where the story begins. Where did this idea come from?
It just came out of my head. I always enjoyed rereading, because I read it 12 times, Humphrey Bogart's The Treasure of the Sierra Madre.
Oh, yes.
I said that was the kind of book I wanted to write, so that's why this one had been developed.
When you do something like that, what type of research does that entail? Because you're very descriptive at the time. I'm sure you had to go back and do some research mentally, at least go back to that time period.
Not really. I'll tell you, I was born with a photographic memory, so everything I've ever learned is there in my head.
So that's
It's a matter
interesting.
of drawing upon it when I need it.
So when you do research, you just sort of close your eyes and go off in a quiet room and it comes back to you.
Just about the way I do it.
The book is Sunken Spanish Treasure Quest by Richard Joseph Johnson. I mentioned these are not... Okay, so once you decide to write the book, you decide not to take us where we normally would by these people that are out used to doing these sea adventures and looking for treasure. You decided to come up with a group of friends. Talk about the friends, why they decide to go off on this quest.
Oh, we were all pretty much the same. We hung around together just about every day. We all had different positions that we were in, and we said it's about time we break up this routine of ours and find out what's going on in the world, and that's why we did it.
And I don't want to give away too much in the book because we see all of this unfold, but it's really not necessarily as easy as they thought maybe, or as much fun initially as they thought it was going to be.
You're asking me if it was fun?
Well, for them, it really turned out to be a lot different than I think they imagined when the four got together and decided we're going to go look for this.
Yes, that's right. We all agreed to it. I was the reluctant one, being the one writing the story, and it turned out fine. In the end, anyway, it did.
Well, yes, and learned some valuable lessons along the way. When you have an idea like this and it comes to mind, do you sit and just write, or do you pretty well script this out and do an outline, but sort of a format of where you're going to go and how you're going to get there?
I never outline. I create everything from scratch and as I go. And I do, in my own mind, I live everything I write in my mind. It's just the way my mind works.
Well, and it's why you've been so successful in doing this. As I'm listening to you a couple minutes ago, I'm thinking you actually did this because you actually believe in your mind. I mean, you're living what you're writing in the book, obviously.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
Again, that's why it's so believable. This is just one of many books from Richard Joseph Johnson, Sunken Spanish Treasure Quest. You'll find all the books and information at Amazon.com, and you can link on directly by going to our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Talk about it's written in the first person, you. Talk about the different characters in the book and writing dialogue and using dialogue to also move the storyline along.
Well, two of the three people that accompanied me on this trip, in my mind, are both passed away now since the book was written. One was my cousin George, and the other was a friend of mine, Louis. But I tried to make the personalities as were their personalities, and it pretty well worked out for me.
And they go on this quest, and they really have no knowledge, do they, of underwater treasure hunting and pitfalls and perils. It sounds pretty glamorous to somebody on the outside, but they really don't have a lot of understanding when they go into this.
We were novices. We knew nothing about it. We were like babes in the wood, but it worked out. We had a little difficulties along the way.
And as you're going through this, well, yeah, difficulties that unfold in the book, Sunken Spanish Treasure Quest, and they try to keep this a secret as well. Talk about that aspect of it. It wasn't like we decided to do this and we went and told everybody. There's really a cloak of secrecy there.
Well, we knew from some experiences that some of these sunken treasures didn't work out too well for the people who went through the trouble of finding them. They got little or nothing in return for their efforts. So that's why we kept it quiet. But in the end, of course, it was the wrong thing they had done.
The book, as I say, goes back to 1733. Talk about the ship. This was a long-sunken 15-ton wooden two-masted galleon, the San de Cristo. Talk about the ship and what happened. Bad water, difficult water, and it went under.
Well, there was a situation where we were confronted by a group of pirates, modern-day pirates, who, for some reason, found out about what we had been involved in, and they wanted to take it all away from us. So we had to deal with that, and we did.
And you see it all unfold in the book, Sunken Spanish Treasure Quest. It's one of those from the reviews that you'll find that it's true, that once you start reading, you can't wait to turn the page and find out what's going to happen next in that story. I mentioned all the books, we talked about it in the beginning, that you've written, and it's a broad mixture of books. Talk about that. Your interest is very broad and varied, isn't it?
Yes, it is, definitely. I've written adventure. I've written books about... I never wrote a love book. I'll have to try that sometime. But about political, I've written political books. Anything that I have an interest in at the time. It might just be something I hear, or I really don't plan anything. It just kind of comes to me.
You know, it's interesting, and there's so much political intrigue going on all around the world, actually, now. We've got the situation, of course, in Great Britain, situation unfolding here in the U.S. What are you working on now? I would think there'd be a lot of it that would strike your fancy as you're hearing them.
Well, to tell you the truth, I'm not writing any more books. I think that was my last one. I'm writing other things, but not books. I've written a lot of poetry. That's how I started out. I've written a lot of poetry, and I liked it, but it wasn't paying for anything. So books are better.
Now, will you go back to writing poetry?
Well, no, I write it occasionally. I'll write a poem, but I've written well over 100 poems, and it was enjoyable. But I think my mind is in a different direction now.
Well, you've done so well with the books that we talked about, and the autobiographical book, A Call to the American People. Talk about that book. That was in 1994. What brought that on?
Call to the American People. I didn't write that book. I was a ghostwriter in that book for a man by the name of Hector Charles Borghetti. He was quite a man and a friend of mine, but he's long dead now. But he commissioned me to write the book for him.
What is that like when you do ghostwriting, where you are taking their life and then enhancing it on the page? Talk about the challenges of doing that. If there are challenges, it's certainly different than sitting and you creating the entire narrative. Now you're following theirs.
Yeah, it was a challenge, but he was an interesting man. He'd come and he'd spend 6 hours a day with me, telling me things, and I would take notes, and then I would transcribe those and change them around. And yeah, it worked out real well. But he was one of two. There was another I did, plus my own autobiography. At this point, is 450 pages long. I have to do something about that.
Will you ever publish yet? That's titled, at least now, Looking Backward. It sounds like
That's it. It's called Looking Backward.
Yeah, and it sounds like that's sort of a continuing project. Are you still adding to that as you go?
Well, yes. I'm 86 years old now. So I don't know how much more time I have, but I will finish it, I hope.
Well, the way you sound much younger than 86, so you've got plenty of time to finish the book and get it out there. You mentioned you're not doing that much writing anymore, but I know that you're writing country western songs. Are you into music as well?
I wrote a couple of country western songs, and interestingly, one of them was arranged by a very famous arranger. L. Richards was his name. He was a music arranger for Lawrence Welk.
Ah, okay. See, I remember that name. I'm old enough to remember that. You still see Lawrence Welk programs on some PBS stations around the country, so they're timeless. They are still there. Are you doing any writing of music now?
No, I really am not. I play a theater organ. That's my instrument. But my wife passed away 7-8 months ago, and so I don't play anymore. I used to play for her. But,
where did all this interest in music come from? I mean, this varied art background that you have. Did that start as a young child?
I think so. Yes, I had a cousin who had a old upright piano, and I would poke around at it. And then eventually I purchased a large theater organ. And I had a very famous instructor from Russia. And she got me going on with the organ and playing. That's about it, really.
Well, you write obviously quite a bit with all the works that you have published. Are you an avid reader? Who were some of the influences that?
Interestingly, the last books that I read for myself were when I was in the Army, which was during the Korean War. That was it. I don't think I wrote a book since then. Read a book since then.
You're too busy writing them.
Yeah, I decided to write them instead. But I'm not a reader.
And we're all the richer for it. Maybe that's a good thing, because what we see is not you trying to emulate your favorite author. It's you being genuine with the stories that you're telling. The book is Sunken Spanish Treasure Quest, the most recent book from Richard Joseph Johnson. Talk about the feedback you're getting from that, and what you hope we take away from that, because it's such a really intriguing story, an adventure story. It's a very enjoyable read. What kind of feedback are you getting?
Not really too much, but I had the last one prior to that was my favorite, which it was a psychological thriller, and it runs about the same size of a book, about 420 pages.
What was it about that book that really, the psychological thriller? So here's something totally different than there's a little psychology probably that amateur psychologist would have fun reading about the characters in the book Sunken Spanish Treasure Quest. But what was it about that book in particular that you really enjoyed?
It's called A Mortuary Mansion, and I don't think it's actually published just yet. It's in the process, and it has to do, like the title, people in the mortuary business, and quite a mystery. It's quite a mystery. Very deep.
I hope that that's published soon and we have a chance to read that. So many books by Our guest on the program, Richard Joseph Johnson. If you go to Amazon, of course, you will find information on Sunken Spanish, Treasure Quest, and all of the other books. You can link on directly by going to our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Please don't stop writing. Continue. Get that book we were talking about published, because that sounds like a fascinating book. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us on the program today. Continued success with your writing, and again, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Rick, very much. I appreciate it.
It has been a pleasure, sir. Richard Joseph Johnson, our guest. The book we're talking about is Sunken Spanish Treasure Quest. You'll find it available at Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble. If you go to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, you can link on and get information on the book and purchase it as well. Sunken Spanish Treasure Quest. Richard Joseph Johnson, our guest. Back on This Week in America after these messages.